Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Michael Grynbaum, a reporter for the New York Times, longtime reporter who's covered the media for many years and has recently, I guess, added politics and culture as part of the triple mix. And there's a lot of that going around these days. And that's for sure. Um, Tell me, what is the most recent story that's been in the paper that you did?
I wrote a story about Tucker Carlson, the Fox News, former Fox News star who was fired by Fox News quite spectacularly about a year ago. And
Right.
I was actually in Milwaukee covering the Republican National Convention. And lo and behold, I looked up and saw that Tucker Carlson was back with a vengeance. He was I was seeing him all over the convention site, and then there he was in the royal box, as it were, with Donald Trump and his family. And I was really intrigued by this because I know that Carlson's continued to publish interviews and videos online, but I hadn't really, I guess I thought the average American probably hadn't seen him for, a little more than a year. And so I called up a few of his people in his circle, and I ended up getting a few minutes with him on the telephone and asking him about what he'd been up to and how this had all come together. And I think it was I think it was an illuminating story about the right-wing media world and how I guess what was kind of going on there behind the scenes, out of view of the average viewer.
I guess he's doing a lot on Truth Social and other places now. And also, what did I read a lot of your stuff, but Grynbaum is misspelled in every one of them. I wondered if that, I read it, I was doing some research on you, and I discovered some obituaries for people who spell it the same way you do. And I thought, well, maybe he didn't change it. I know I didn't change mine, which was rat. So what is your story with the Y? With a Y?
Yeah.
Is the Y there?
Well, Grynbaum, I believe means green tree in some Germanic ancestral language.
Right.
So, my name's spelled with a Y. And
Were you born with that?
I was, and the reason now I think the anglicized version is green, like the color.
Oh,
And the reason is because my father, from whom I inherit the Grynbaum title, um, he uh, he actually grew up in Australia. So his family, yeah, so his family were survivors of the concentration camps. His parents met in a displaced persons camp, and they actually emigrated to Australia, which I think was the first country, they could sort of get a visa to.
yeah.
So there's a small Jewish community in Melbourne, Australia, um, which consists of a lot of, I think, a lot of European refugees, and their progeny. And so my father actually lived in Australia until he was about 30 years old, and so he never went through the Ellis Island conversion process of which I think would have coughed up Grynbaum, as you more commonly see in the U.S. And then my mother is American. My father met her when he was traveling through the States, um, and ended up moving to the U.S. And I was born in Boston, and so I sort of I circumvented the name change process, and I kept the original article.
Tell me what your growing up was. What did your parents do in the house? Was it an intellectual community? I know you went to Harvard, um, and so that was either a great exception or you were following in a literary tradition, I guess.
Um, Well, my father is a mechanical engineer, and he worked on various power plants and things like that in the Northeast. My mother was a school teacher, and for me, I think so. I grew up outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and I really got the newspaper bug by reading the Hartford Courant, which used to be one of the really premier regional papers in the country. They brought down a couple of governors. They did a lot of great political reporting, and I used to read over the sports page when I was a kid. I loved reading the box scores of a
Yes, me
baseball
too. I
game.
still do.
And just all the little fonts and little numbers, and I used to pore over that, and I used to make up my own. I used to make up my own sports leagues and write newspaper articles about them. That's sort of how I got started. When I was about 12 or 13, my parents started subscribing to the New York Times. I think they had gotten some offer for, a 7-day a week delivery or something. And I remember just being really enthralled, and feeling like, both with the level of writing and also just the knowledge that was sort of contained in the newspaper every day. And so I got really, just really determined to sort of work in newspapers. It was just sort of what I always wanted to do. And actually, the reason neither of my parents had attended a private college, growing
Did,
up.
did you work on the school paper in high school?
Oh, yes, I did. Hall Highlights, which was the monthly newspaper of Hall High School in West Hartford, and I was the editor-in-chief.
Oh, it's just a short leap to the New York Times from there.
Well, I used to write a lot of movie reviews. I used to love writing about culture and things like that. And I did an internship at the Hartford Courant when I was in high school. I was on the editorial board one summer. They were looking for a youthful voice. And so they had me weigh in on matters that pertain to younger people. And one day I think I realized that a lot of journalists who I really admired had gone to Harvard, had written for the school newspaper there. And that was really what sort of got me very interested in the school. And I wanted, Harvard has one of the oldest, it sounds ridiculous, but there's a daily college paper that the
I know.
students create, which is like you barely spend any time in your classes. You're sort of just putting out this broadsheet every single day.
When
And
I was there, they didn't allow women to work on that paper. It was unless they were married, so it was the other way around. I had to pretend that I was married to her. So that's why I remembered it because otherwise she wouldn't have been able to get a job there. That was a long time ago.
by the time I had made it, they were open to journalists of all genders. Yeah, it was a little more of an open system.
Well, in any case, it seems as if, did you start directly with the New York Times from school?
Yeah, I had an unusual path, which was I did internships every summer at a different newspaper, and I had spent a summer at the Boston Globe in Washington, D.C., under a fantastic editor named Peter Canellis, who's very talented. And he had been kind enough to sort of select me for that role, and I learned a lot, and that really positioned me well to get an internship at the New York Times when I graduated. And my job was on the Metro desk, covering New York local news. And I remember the first day, I think I graduated on a Thursday. I moved to New York on a Sunday. Oh, yes. And then I walked into the office Monday for my first day and they said, you're going to Albany, figure out how to get there.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and by Monday night, I was in a hotel. I was in a hotel in Albany, New York, and they had me covering the State House.
What do you think's the most interesting story comes to mind that you've ever covered during this almost 20 years? That's a tough question, I'm sure.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's hard to choose one. You know, I always joke that I'm a if I get put on a beat, something unpleasant is about to happen because I ended up getting hired at the Times in a very junior role as a stock market writer. And I actually knew very little, believe it or not, as I was an English and history major at Harvard. I did not know a whole lot about the stock market. And I asked some of my friends who had studied economics to help me, learn about it. Anyway, I started in that job in the fall in late 2007. And about within about 6 months the global financial system was crashing down, and so I ended up kind of writing all about one of the great global financial collapses of in history of 2008. That was an absolutely fascinating moment. um and then in 2016 they put me on to covering presidential politics, and I went and I wrote about a press secretary, this young woman who had no experience. She was the press secretary to a candidate named Donald Trump, and I went to Trump Tower to the campaign office. You walk in the door, there was a big cardboard cutout of John Wayne and Ronald Reagan, I was sort of on the ground floor of that whole phenomenon. So it's hard to really name just one, Dan. One of the great things about being a journalist, and what I think still makes it such a compelling profession, is that you really don't know what you're going to do when you wake up in the morning,
Yeah.
when you go to work, and there's something kind of that's still an exciting way to start the day.
Do you come out to the Hamptons often for visits, or do you have a place out here?
Yeah, well, my wife and I, we don't have a place out here, but my one of my college roommates, who you are acquainted with, his family's had a home out here for about 30, 40 years, and we've spent time with them on summer weekends, and actually during the pandemic, we spent a little time out here, and it's just lovely. It's such a wonderful escape from the city. It's I've gotten to know sort of the neighborhoods a lot better, and the community out here. And Dan, I think you've given me some recommendations for bagel places and bakeries and the like. And it's a great, almost, it feels like always, to me, always a great extension of the New York world. There's artists, there's financiers, there's writers, there's authors, and there's journalists too. So it's a nice mix of what I think of what makes New York City a very vibrant place.
What do you like most about, what do you like to do when you're out here?
Um, well, uh, I'm very partial to Goldberg's Bagels, weirdly.
It's, it's hard to miss, actually.
They're really they're really quite good. One of my favorite things to do actually is to just drive to now you might have to help me here. Lily Pond Lane. Is it on Georgia Pond, or that's Lily Pond?
That's on Lily Pond Lane, is it's on Lily. I guess it's on Lily Pond. It's not on Georgia Pond, though.
Maybe
Um,
Georgia's next to it. But
yeah,
that sort of walk where you can walk around the perimeter of the lake, and Great Gardens, the house is up on one corner. Actually, Sally Quinn, who was the former owner, is someone who I've gotten to know through my job. She's very generous with young journalists, and she's told me, you know, she's told me there are lots of memories of her time when she was living in East Hampton. But that's a really lovely meditative walk, I find. It's often very quiet. You can kind of glimpse at some of the beautiful homes that are around there. And I've done some great thinking and thought through stories and ideas, just sort of taking a constitutional there. So I think that's a kind of a quiet spot that's really quite special.
Yeah. I had read that you admire the journalistic rules of the New York Times as a model for how to do it right. But I don't find that the case. I thought they turned left a while ago. I turned left too, but I don't advertise it. And I moved all my news over to the Associated Press because I felt that, whenever anything happened on the Democratic side, as a journalist, it was all the headlines, and anything that went wrong on the Republican side was headlines. And it was not, I felt it was very one-sided. It happened to be a side I liked, but I really wanted to find out what was going on more. That's what I did. And I wondered if you would comment on that, just on whether it's moved or not in your view.
Yeah. Well, you won't be surprised that having been there for much of my career, I'm an advocate for the New York Times. I think that the most important value that we bring to our journalism is independence. And I think that there's a lot of discussion about, can you be objective? And journalists are people too. We have our feelings. I think that what I find in watching a lot of my colleagues' work is just a dedication to sort of independent inquiry in what they do and taking on topics that can be difficult or sensitive. Political reporting is one of the most scrutinized genres of reporting that I think the paper performs. I know that when Biden took over the White House, there was a lot of, we had faced. Well, I'll put it this way. I think when Trump was in office, a lot of conservatives were very upset that our coverage, or they perceived our coverage as too tough on Trump. And when Biden took office, so there were many on the left who thought that our coverage was too tough on Biden. And look, a newspaper is a human endeavor. That's why we have a corrections box that you'll find every single day on page A2 or A3 now, one or the other in your print edition. I think that we I think that humility is an important aspect to a journalist's skill set. But day in, day out, on balance, I really think that the New York Times still stands as a real beacon of sort of high quality independent journalism that's fueled by a real collective expertise on the part of our staff. We have journalists who are incredibly specialized and expert in their subjects of coverage. Yeah, I'll stand by that.
Do you have any? I think you told me you have a book out, or you're writing.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. I'll be back again to plug it if it ever gets published. I'm writing it's a cultural history of Condé Nast magazines, which is the publisher of Vogue, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, GQ, Architectural Digest, sort of a whole portfolio of magazines that, at least I believe, really kind of defined American aspiration over the period of about 50 or 60 years. And the book is in some ways kind of a tribute to this era of glossy magazines, which were sort of this amazing form of journalism and lifestyle tips and beautiful photography and visuals and writing, of course. Magazines have they don't they once occupied a really paramount role in our culture, and I think that moment has passed. And there's some amazing personalities like Tina Brown and Anna
Yeah.
Wintour and um, even David Remnick, who's currently the editor of the New Yorker, who Graydon Carter, formerly Vanity Fair. These are all just wonderful American, in some cases British characters, and I'm hoping my book will capture the glamour and the excitement, the energy, and some of the sins and flaws of that era, and hopefully in one entertaining package.
Where do you see as a future for the city of New York in how things are going compared to when you first came on the scene?
Mm. Well, that's a great question. I covered New York City Hall. I was actually the City Hall bureau chief for the New York Times for a couple of years, and I, I actually there's nothing like writing about New York City. I think it's people are so um, people just love hearing about everything, how things work in the city, and what's going on. Look, I covered Mayor Bloomberg. I think that history will smile on Mayor Bloomberg. I think that he really did a wonderful job
I did too.
of making New York City into a vibrant, safe environment. Um, I still think that there's a wonderful energy there. I think, we've had issues with, there's been more homelessness. There's been more, I think, visible poverty on the streets. Um, I'm not a big fan of those giant bikes that, sort of zoom through red lights and intersections. I think the traffic enforcement maybe could be a little better. But I live in the East Village. New York is just my favorite place in the world, and I think that if you look at the history of the city, it always comes back. It always kind of redefines itself. There's always a stream of young, creative people who are going to come to New York City and make it their home and sort of shape it for the next generation. And I think it's that I think rebirth is a big part of New York City's history. So I'm always optimistic on New York City.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. I'm glad to have you as a friend. I guess my last question would be talk a little bit about your love of old cars and,
Oh,
and driving with the top down.
no, thanks for bringing that up, Dan. Actually, I love car spotting in the Hamptons because people seem to keep their beloved old cars out here, and they put a lot of love into them, and it's great to see them kind of in the summertime, driving down Main Street and the like.
What
Um,
you have one, I think.
yeah, so now I have to give credit to my wife who persuaded me to make this purchase. But we have a 1986 Mercedes 560 SL. It's a wonderful car. It's a convertible. Um, we bought it with about 100,000 miles on it. We now I won't lie, first year, we had to repair this and that. The radiator blew up, the tubes had to get replaced. It's sort of a labor of love.
Yeah.
But once we kind of got past the startup costs, it's just a lovely, wonderful car to drive. It's really fun. We always get people stopping and asking about it. We often see them in the Hamptons, and there's sort of a nice little community of honking and waving, and which is kind of nice. And yeah, I didn't think that I would be kind of like a vintage car guy, but I really have gotten a lot of pleasure out of it. So, for those who are thinking about taking the plunge, if you can kind of put up with the annual mechanics pilgrimage and be a little flexible, it can be really a great it can make something quotidian like driving into a really pleasurable experience.
Well, we'll end with that. Thank you for being on the podcast, and I've enjoyed it and enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's been great getting to know you, and I love that you're doing this, and it's great. I feel honored that you had me on. So thanks for having me.
Sure. Bye-bye.